And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most important IU basketball stories from the past 7 days. This is our 90th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 421st episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, August 23rd, 2018. I am your host, Andy Bottoms, as this week Jared is enjoying some well-deserved time off. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. With Hoosier Hysteria just over a month away, we were able to check off 2 more offseason milestones this week as both the official roster and the full schedule were released. Jared broke down the height and weight numbers on an edition of Banner Morning, and it would certainly seem that Marshall's offseason plans are already paying dividends for players up and down the roster as they prepare for the season. And as for the schedule, IU fans had already pieced together the non-conference slate, but the release of the conference schedule now allows us to view it in its entirety and project how the season could play out, look at the feasibility of challenging for a Big Ten title, and envisioning a path back to the NCAA tournament. Accurate predictions for a team we've yet to see play a single minute together, at least outside of social media clips, will be hard to come by, but for now, it's all we've got to get us through the next 37 days. I will say that I talked myself out of using the entirety of this week's banner moment to address what transpired at Ohio State on Wednesday, and there are certainly people who have already done that far more eloquently than I could. I will add 2 things. One, I think I speak for all IU fans when I say that I hope to never see any of the school's athletics programs in that position. But if we did, I certainly hope that it would be handled with far more tact than the buffoonery we witnessed in Columbus, where the real issue at the heart of the situation was willfully ignored and or ignorantly dismissed. And as I read through a number of articles at Urban Meyer, one of which was written by our own Ryan Phillips, and the school's apparent willingness to turn a blind eye to domestic violence in the name of winning football games, I was directed to an article by Diana Moskovitz on Deadspin. Article pointed out that whether it be coincidence or not, both Urban Meyer and Joe Paterno used the phrase, "I wish I had done more," in the midst of situations that eventually became more about them than the victims themselves. Individually and collectively, we face many challenges today that far exceed the importance of winning or losing a game. And among the things we can take away from how these domestic violence issues were handled at Ohio State is this: let's not wish, let's do. The less we put ourselves in a position to say, "I wish I had done more" after the fact, and the more that we start actually doing more, the more we're able to help each other take those challenges on together and to enable those who need our help in the first place to feel valued in the process. With that, I'll climb down off my soapbox and introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show. To my left, he was a 10-year high school head coach in Indiana, currently an assistant coach at Western High School. He is the host of Sports Talk with Tonsoni, and he is the founder of the Delphi Bracketology Club. And perhaps most importantly, he is a man who embodies so much of what mentioned above and is doing more through what he's working to build at Delphi. If you look through his timeline on Twitter, you'll find countless examples of opportunities he's providing to his students where they can create content and learn from established journalists and Jared. And what stuck out to me most from his post during the first week of school was a series where he tweeted about encouraging students to look out for one another by sitting with those who are alone at lunch and praising those who did, with a quote such as, "Great things happen when we believe in young people." With that, I will bring on the coach, Brian Tonsoni. Coach, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Andy. That's an incredible introduction. I appreciate it tremendously. As much as I appreciate your banner moment. And what I'm thinking about as an Indiana Hoosier alum and fan and supporter is the fact that I think that we've made some decisions in the past that may have set us back in the win and loss column, but put us on the right path. And as much as I think I really, really like Archie Miller, credit does need to go to Tom Crean for the most part with getting us going in the right direction, with Tom Allen, a guy that I believe is doing things the right way. And I've told many people that I used to root for IU to win for IU and my fandom. This year at football, I really am rooting for IU to be successful and go to a bowl because I think we have a coach who really cares about young people. And when you're in the business of coaching, I think there's something bigger than your one-loss record, and it's what you do for the young men and young women in your programs. And right now, I think Fred Glass is doing a good job trying to get all of the coaches at Indiana University to be those kinds of leaders. On the basketball front, football's right around the corner, and for us fans, we love all sports, but with the start of football, we inch even closer, and the taste of the schedule coming out really gets us excited. And we have some new ranking issues for the RPI, which we need to understand because our Hoosiers will be in the tournament. And So we have a lot to talk about and a lot to be excited about. But thanks again, Andy. It's, I appreciate the kindness, but it's people like you who have helped me in the last few years with bracketology, and Jared with podcasting, who have given me the ideas to then go and share. So it's not just me alone. It's the people you surround yourself with. And the Assembly Call group is a fantastic group.
All right. Well, now that we're done patting each other on the back, we'll move on. And to my right was supposed to be Ryan Phillips, but Ryan got called into work potentially because he was worried that Brian and I had prepared some kind of day late serenade of happy birthday, since yesterday was Ryan's birthday. But I'm also on the lookout for any social media posts where he might be out drinking with Jared, who's visiting San Diego. So at any rate, Ryan will not be here. So that leaves the coach and I, but we've got a lot to talk about. So I don't think we'll have trouble filling in the hour that we have. So obviously we're going to go deep into the schedule that was released on Tuesday in conjunction with the Big Ten schedule unveiling. So we'll look predominantly at IU schedule, but also some components of some other Big Ten teams. We'll put our bracketology hats on and talk about the death of the RPI and the birth of the NET or net, as it were, and what that means for us as we try to project the field this next year. And we will answer your questions as we always do on the Assembly Call. Before we get to this week's top story, I do have a quick reminder for you about a great way to shop online for tickets. Commit this URL to memory or bookmark it, iutickets.shop. It will take you right to SeatGeek, where you can immediately find the best deals on IU basketball tickets, as well as IU football tickets, concert tickets, and other live events. As a bonus, use the promo code ASSEMBLY to get $20 back on your first purchase. And when you use that URL, iutickets.shop, to buy tickets, we get paid a commission for referring you. I've had a few come through this week, and as people have been buying IU football tickets, and these commissions add up and really have a big impact on helping us cover the costs of running the show, like website hosting, podcast equipment, and pay for Coach Tonsoni's trips to see B.D. Anderson's barber. Once again, the URL is iutickets.shop. You are listening to Assembly Call Radio. I'm Andy Bottoms here with Coach Brian Tonsoni, and we're going to hit a couple schedule things first. So Coach, I know Inside the Hall had, their 5 takeaways from the schedule release. What were one or two things that really stood out for you when you had a chance to step back and take a look at the schedule?
The number one thing from my vantage point was I'm glad that the Big Ten tournament is back to the week where it should be, right before the tournament. That stretches out the schedule a little bit, and we're not discussing the 3 games with 1-day turnarounds in a row and which team has the advantage, 4 2-day turnarounds versus 1. I think that was inherently unfair for a variety of programs, and I think Indiana had a little bit of a short straw last year. The other thing that hit me, Andy, is trying to figure out, this is the fan part of me, is which games should we win, which games are going to be kind of likely the real tough ones, and who's going to be competitive, because there's some unknowns inside the Big Ten with who's returning and how they're going to gel, and some key losses to some key programs. Last year, Minnesota and Northwestern were thought to be top 4 programs and turned out to have down years. So those kinds of ideas, when you initially look at a schedule and you pick this game as winnable or a tough game, often change due to preseason situations. So those are a couple of my takeaways. I kind of like the fact that we get off to a start in what I think we have some tough non-conference games, especially in a row, that Northwestern and at Penn State give us a chance to maybe get off to a good start. That kind of made me happy, but we could also make an argument the other way around as well. But in the middle of Butler and Louisville and Duke, I think that's kind of a nice draw for us.
Yeah, it was interesting. That was one of the things I wanted to talk through, those first couple Big Ten games. And I feel like last year Michigan State had a couple of really easy ones, and one would probably argue that the same thing holds true this year. They play at Rutgers and they play Iowa at home. But I tried to go through and look at, most of the teams kind of the top. I kind of picked the top 8 as the ones I think even last week we touched on as being the ones who were probably, most in the mix for a tournament bid. And if you look down that list, most of those are not too bad. I think Purdue actually probably got the worst of it, where they play at Michigan and then they play Maryland at home. And I think part of that is tough for a Purdue team that's replacing a lot of guys and going to be trying to sort some things out at that point in the season. One that really stuck out to me as a really tough start. Most of the others, even if they had one tougher game, everybody's playing one road, one home game. That part evens out for everyone. But even the others that may have had, Michigan has Purdue at home, but they go on the road to Northwestern, so not terrible. I do think IU's draw in that case is relatively favorable. I'm not as high on Penn State, maybe as some other people would be, and then get Northwestern at home. So anything else stand out to you from those early Big Ten games in terms of what we might be able to learn about people early on?
Well, you're not going to learn much from Michigan State. I think they got a nice, easy draw there. I'm looking at teams, Michigan State and Michigan are the top two in most of the preseason talk. I'm going to be interested to watch that Michigan-Purdue matchup because I think both teams have the capability of being in the top 6 in the Big Ten, but I also think both teams lost significant players. So that's going to be a game there where that's going to tell me a lot of who's focused. And then you get down to, there's some interesting matchups. Ohio State, Minnesota, Ohio State, Illinois, new coaches, new programs. Ohio State was really good last year. Illinois struggled a little bit. What happens with those up and coming programs as well? And they play Ohio State and Minnesota. And so those are going to be some interesting tells after those two games early, late November, early December, to see kind of what the pecking order might be. 18 games left after that. But there's some key matchups to watch, I believe.
Yeah, in terms of key stretches for IU, there's one that's gotten a lot of discussion in the IU basketball world, and that's the stretch where they play 6 out of 8 on the road, kind of in that early Big Ten schedule. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that after we come back from the break. So stick with us on Assembly Call Radio, and we'll talk some more schedule coming back after this. All right. Well, welcome everybody on YouTube. We're far less technologically advanced with Jared gone. He and I spent quite a bit of time trying to get things to work the other night with limited luck. So no sound drops, no any of that, no intro music. So we'll try to kind of keep time different ways and get through things there. But appreciate everybody joining us. Hopefully we've got it started. Nobody has written and said they can't see or hear anything. So that's the first victory in my book. So I think we're in pretty good shape so far. So I got to do math here. 11, 20. Yeah, I think we got about 11 and a half minutes for this next one. So we'll get into that and then we'll kind of hit some of your notes and go from there. In between the break. So Peyton Ramsey named the starting quarterback. Any thoughts on that? Was that surprising to you?
Yeah, it only was surprising because you got a grad transfer who had 10 or 11 other schools to go to who wanted to come play for your school in his last year. But the best quarterback should play. And if Ramsey gives Indiana the best chance to win, there could be an issue with Dawkins just showing up at fall camp, learning the offense that Ramsey had a huge advantage or lead. It did surprise me a little bit just because they brought Dawkins in, but maybe there's a package or something. You read between the lines in the interviews.
Yeah. I think I was surprised. That was really the only part of it that kind of surprised me, is just because, you would think they'd be bringing him in to, certainly it was a situation he thought he'd come into and start. Doesn't mean he won't eventually, and that they won't figure things out. And they're relatively similar, I would say, between the two of them. So maybe there's some opportunity to swap them out a little bit, but I think that's probably a good thing. I think Penix I think they want to do everything they can to redshirt him, which feels like the right move. So unless he was really far and away better than everybody else, that part of it didn't surprise me, but we'll see what Dawkins does. Yeah, I wonder if it's not just a learning curve thing, but we shall see.
Yeah, it could be something for 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 games. I mean,
yeah.
And, we'll see.
Yeah. Agreed. All right. Well, I'm gonna hop back in here and we'll kind of talk that 6-8 game stretch, and then I'll hit some of the stuff from Jared's post, and then we'll hit some of yours and go from there.
Sounds good.
We got about 11 and a half minutes, so I'll try to keep you posted in the chat. All right. You are listening to Assembly Call Radio. If you ever have to miss all or part of an episode of Assembly Call Radio or one of our postgame shows, there are two great ways to catch up. You can subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for Assembly Call. Or you can watch the video replays of all of our shows on YouTube. To subscribe to our YouTube channel, go to youtube.com/assemblycall. I'm Andy Bottoms here with the coach Brian Tonsoni, and we are breaking down IU's schedule, which got released earlier this week. And Brian, the one thing, if anybody pinpoints, I feel like we did this on the show last year after the schedule came out. We kind of talked through stretches that we thought were key. I didn't feel that was necessary this year because everyone would point to the same one. So there's this 8-game stretch where 6 of the games are on the road, and even the home games are difficult. And it starts on Sunday, January 6th, where they travel to Michigan. So they play at Michigan, at Maryland, home against Nebraska, at Purdue, at Northwestern, home against Michigan, at Rutgers, and at Michigan State. So in about a month's worth of time, you go from January 6th through February 2nd. You play 6 of 8 on the road. Your 2 home games are both against teams predicted to be in the top, let's say, 5 of the league. And really all of the road games, with the exception of Northwestern and Rutgers, are against teams that are also projected toward the top of the league. So obviously that stretch feels brutal to look at the onset. But you were telling me before we went on that you aren't, while there's never a good time to have that stretch, you think the timing of it might not be as bad as people may think at first glance.
Yeah, and what I didn't mention off the air, I'll mention here, is the time period from December 22nd to I think January 3rd, those amount of days for some rest and focused practice on the things from the preseason or the non-conference schedule or the first part of the schedule that Archie can work on with his team. And we talked about the turnaround days, from I think it's Jacksonville on December 22nd to Illinois, which we didn't mention as this part of the stretch, but that's a game right before this stretch. You can really pinpoint the weaknesses from the first 13 games in November and December and really try to work on them. And then you're into the tough stretch. And sometimes that's really nice when you have a break like that, especially in college basketball. And with last year's condensed schedule, there was no time really to get fundamentally recharged. So that's a tough stretch, but I look for us to be a little bit better coming out of that. And then, from the fan standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, you take it one game at a time. You never look ahead. You might scour the schedule at this point of the year and just make some comments, get some scouting done, those kinds of things. But as a fan, so I take my coach hat off. As a fan, if you could get three wins out of this, you'll be in a position for a top finish. And more than that, I think you're really doing well in this toughest stretch. And you got to look at Northwestern, at Rutgers, and Nebraska at home. Those are 3 that, most Indiana teams most years would win. And then let's get a chance at some of these other teams. So, I'm looking at, if we can get 3 or 4 out of that stretch, that is a solid time, and then finish strong with a really a good beneficial schedule towards the end.
Yeah, the 2 thoughts I have about it are, one, maybe IU can benefit from something that we talked about a lot last year, which was, other teams came into Assembly Hall before the students were back and what the atmosphere was like. And so IU will have, maybe that Illinois game that you mentioned, likely students won't be there, but really for the other conference games, the students are going to be there for all of them. And maybe, I have no idea what, timing is of when people go back to school. Maybe that Michigan game is when students aren't there. Or at the very least, maybe Michigan's in the college football playoff and nobody actually knows basketball season has started. You go to Maryland. Again, I don't know the timing of when people go back, but you might be able to, hit a couple what would normally be relatively tough road trips that wouldn't be as bad from that standpoint. And the other side is, things have to balance out. So that means your closing schedule is a bit more favorable with a lot more home games. And so I think that's something that, again, if we start thinking about NCAA tournament and those kinds of things, you can build some momentum heading into the Big Ten tournament and heading into the postseason. So, it's not ideal to play a stretch with 6 of 8 on the road. But I think if they can get off to a good start in some of those games, things can start to snowball in a positive way. On the flip side, they could start to snowball in a negative way. But hopefully they've built some momentum in the non-conference at that point and can get off to a good start. And there are 3 Big Ten games, those 2 that we mentioned earlier, plus the Illinois game, give them a chance to have some games. And while you don't want to think of it this way, maybe you built yourself up a little bit by, if you win those first three, the thought of maybe losing a handful of these is a little bit less daunting, and you come out of this stretch at 500 or so in total, and you feel okay about where you're going from there. Another couple notes. Jared had another banner morning. I think we've hit on some of these points. Only one exhibition game this year. Sounds like that does leave open the possibility of playing some of these secret scrimmages that people talk about. Who knows whether that will actually be the case, just because I think schedules and things like that are a little bit more condensed. The other big one was the turnaround. So there's 10 2-day turnarounds, which sounds like a lot, but if you think about playing on a Wednesday to a Saturday, that kind of counts as a 2-day turnaround where you've got 2 days in between as opposed to just one. So that to me is kind of standard for college basketball. So the 10 on the surface feels like a lot. To me, it's really not. I think a lot of that you can attribute to what you brought up in the opening of having the Big Ten tournament at a normal time. And you see, this year when you can step back, you see just how much that actually impacted the schedule. So we had those. The days of the week were a little bit spread out. You're still seeing those Monday and Friday games, which are a little bit less normal, but kind of made for TV. But again, I think overall, I think some improvements to the schedule from the Big Ten's perspective as to what they have at this point, and we'll obviously see what happens. You're listening to Assembly Call Radio. I'm Andy Bottoms here with the coach, Brian Tonsoni. And Brian, when we were exchanging some emails earlier in the week about this, you kind of put a coach's perspective on the scheduling and how you look at this. And that's one of the reasons that we love to have you on, is to kind of get that different perspective. So from a coaching standpoint, when you sit down and you look at the schedule, what are some of the key things that you look for? And if you've had time, how do you think this schedule, marries up with that?
Well, I look for the key parts of the schedule where we have to have certain packages in. You're looking at Marquette as the first, top game. You're going to have some 3-point defense in that game. Duke, you're just going to have some Zion Williamson defense in that. But you could look ahead at stretches and what do you need to put in at different stretches is one thing. I also like to look at how can the turnaround days I think are more important to a coach, because you want to have proper rest. You want to get your kids to class. You want to have preparation. You want to get film study. And so you can start mapping out your practice times with the 20-hour limits and all of that. You can have your basketball operation guy or whoever they have do that. You can explain your strategy. So I think that's a key part, where we fans, we look at who's on the road and what time and when are they playing certain teams. I think it's more about that. The other thing from a coaching standpoint is, are there any teams that we have to have a specialty idea? Like Isaac Haas last year was a specialty. You're not running into 2 or 3 teams that are going to have that kind of post play. So you want to identify those and how much time ahead of time you want to put in your scheme for certain teams. And the last thing is, are there clumps of teams that have similar styles, a motion or a set play or a dribble drive team? It would be really beneficial. And I haven't scoured the schedule for this, but it really would help if similar teams are bunched together, again, for your preparation.
Yeah. So, I noticed as I was talking earlier, I kind of mentioned this a couple of times. I don't know if it's one of those things like that's a myth, like being, clutch or whatever those kinds of things are, however we define some of those things. But, I talked a couple of times about, how they could potentially build some momentum into that, heading into that 6 of 8 game stretch on the road, and how they could build momentum toward the end of the season as they go toward an NCAA tournament. I mean, in the heat of the season and going game to game, is that a real thing, or is that something that we kind of talk ourselves into?
No, I think it's real. I think, you got to guard when you're winning from being overconfident, because then a team that you're not expecting will sneak up and beat you if you get too comfortable. And the other direction, the negative momentum, you could lose confidence and then not win a game again that you're supposed to, because you're feeling down a little bit. So I really believe coaching, you need a psychology degree to coach at high school and college to really understand where your team's at and try to keep your team. It's cliche-ish, but even keel. But yeah, you kind of look for, hey, can we get 3 or 4 wins in a row, feel good about ourselves going into a big game? That would be good. But again, you try mostly one game at a time. The only looking ahead you're doing is for those big gap, cluster strategy things in a long-term planning session.
So the other thing about this year's team is that it's a lot of newcomers, a lot of young guys that they're going to be reliant on. Is there anything special you do as a coach to kind of prepare them for some of these difficult stretches where you're playing a lot of games away from home, a lot of back-to-back road games? It looks like most of these they'd have time to kind of come home in between. There's none that are such a around where you'd stay on the road, but anything special to do to prepare these guys for that kind of road environment? We got about 30 seconds left in the segment. So
yeah,
anything you've got to share there?
You sit down and talk to Jawan Morgan, your leader, and you make sure that he passes on the lessons about what it takes to be, rest on the road, what to do on the road, how to come back off the road, how to handle classes. And you really trust your captains and your leaders to teach the younger guys how to prepare for the schedule.
Yep, I would agree. I think Jawan is going to be even more important than we all think for reasons like that as we move forward. All right, so those of you listening on the radio on Friday night, we'll be switching over to high school football. For everybody else, we're going to come back and kind of break the schedule up into chunks, talk a little bit about projected potential records in those and what we think IU needs to do in each of those stretches. That's next here on the Assembly Call. All right, I think we're good. I think we're a little long, but I think that's not a huge deal.
The other answer,
right.
and with 30 seconds,
yeah.
You
I thought we had more time than we did, and then I saw how much.
Okay. But I believe you got to coach everything. I practice timeouts. I mean, we would sit on the bench, point guard in the middle, and then the players around. We would practice that. Later in my career, I've suggested to coaches when I've been assistant, when I was a head coach, we practiced halftime. We'd practice hard for an hour. We'd go in, see if they'd listen and focus, and then go out and warm up for 2 or 3 minutes, then get right back out on the court. I think, sometimes you've got to really think of all of the things that can get in the mind of, in this case, 18 to 22-year-old kids on the floor and off the floor, and try to either talk them through it with a captain or a coach, or actually physically put them in a position to practice the variety of things. Sometimes the other thing you do is you have players call timeouts in the game and have the players teach or talk strategy, and then pull them aside and say what was good and what's not. You constantly got to teach mental approach, mental focus, and especially when you get to those turnaround games. And if you've lost 2 or 3, those are all interesting decisions that coaches have to make in the season.
Yeah. All right. So I think we'll just kind of jump back in. We'll kind of take these schedules, these sections into chunks. And I think we can just kind of talk about what we, what do we think, what we think the record might be, what a good record out of some of those games would be. And then, we can see where that adds us up, but we'll kind of hit that. And then after the reset, we'll talk about NET. I got to remember we got more time in the second half of the show now because of that. So we should be
sounds good.
We should be good.
Instead of rooting for teams to beat people like in the RPI, we're going to have to root for teams to guard somebody. After we play Chicago State, go out and guard someone so your defensive efficiency is really good and your net gets better.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure that any amount of rooting will help Chicago State, but we'll maybe some of the others we can influence in a positive way.
You're going to have to be, since you're the bracketology guy here, you're going to have to do a net report every post-game show.
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing is that they're talking about. I guess eventually they said they would update it daily, but it's not like anybody else. Where like at the beginning of the season, you got people replicating. I know you guys use the same like Warren Nolan a lot, and like I've got a spreadsheet that like takes and parses out the CBS one to do something different and whatever else. So yeah, we're in the unenviable position of being completely reliant on the NCAA. So that feels just about as good as you'd think it would for anybody who's trying to do that. Oh well, what are you gonna do? All right, I'll start us off here in a second. We'll hit all that stuff. And welcome back to the Assembly Call. We now have almost 6,000 IU fans from around the globe who subscribe to our free email newsletter. What do you get when you subscribe? You get our weekly 6-banner Sunday news roundups, as well as our post-game analysis emails once the season begins. It's all free, and it will make you a smarter and more well-informed IU basketball fan. And joining is easy. Just text IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. Again, go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 and join our free email newsletter today. I'm Andy Bottoms here with Coach Brian Tonsoni, and we are continuing to break down IU's schedule, which was released earlier this week. And Brian, I thought what we would do is I tried to break this into sections. Some of these are consecutive and some of them are. More specifically, the first few are not really consecutive. But I thought we could kind of go through here, talk about what we would expect from IU in these and kind of what we think good looks like for these sections of games. So the non-conference, I basically segmented into bye games and marquee games. So the bye games in that classification would be Chicago State, Montana State, UT Arlington, UC Davis, Central Arkansas, and Jacksonville. I think I would say that the UC Davis is really the only game that should be potentially in question in that group. But this feels like one most fans are going to chalk up as 6-0 in this set of games. You think that's a reasonable expectation? Is that where you would set the record out of those 6?
I think you have to, and this is where our record was hurt last year with the Indiana State. No disrespect to them, but that's a team Indiana needs to beat. Fort Wayne needs to beat. When I was getting ready for the show, I thought we lost to 4 teams that we really were better than. That makes a 16-15 record, 20-11. And I don't know if we make the tournament, but we're at least in the discussion at 20-11. And we have another chance to probably, win another game in the Big Ten tournament if we beat Rutgers. So while these games we kind of throw off to the side, Andy, these are games that, let's not mess around this year. And hence my Hoosier hysteria comment from earlier shows. Let's be doing some closeouts and some 3-point guarding and let's get these 6. But I think we need to go 6-0.
Yep, I'd agree. All right, so I kind of bucketed these as marquee games. You could maybe argue that the at Arkansas game is not a marquee game, but maybe it's just games against major conference teams. So you got the Marquette game at home, at Arkansas, at Duke, Louisville at home, and Butler in the Crossroads. So you look at this stretch of 5 games. What do you expect, and what do you think is kind of a minimum expectation to have for that set of 5?
To get where I would like to see Indiana get, I think they need to go a minimum of 3-2. It'll be interesting to see what Louisville has with Coach Mack being new and the roster that he's putting together. Will he have a similar result with what's gone on there that Archie did when he came in, had some good guys, but was, struggling, and that's at Assembly Hall. Arkansas looks like a game, but it is on the road to an SEC opponent. And as we talk net later, we have no idea how the net's going to work out. They may finish in the bottom of the SEC, but if their scoring margin, they have some close games, and the SEC has strong strengths of schedules, their net could be a little bit higher, and we get a win on the road, and they're still using some tier systems. That's to me is a big game because of the road. And the same as Butler neutral. Not as good as winning on the road, but winning away from Assembly Hall is very, very important. And I think those 2 wins are vital in this segment.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I feel like 3-2 is kind of, I guess you'd set it as a minimum. I don't think it's the end of the world if you do worse than that. But I kind of look at those 2 true road games. The one at Arkansas, while you certainly can't take a true road game for granted, it feels like one that is very winnable because Arkansas had a lot of roster turnover. They lost a ton of scoring. They've got a good big guy inside, but you don't know who's going to be able to get him the ball and those kinds of things. And on the flip side of that, you look at the one at Duke, and that's kind of a house money game. If you somehow find a way to win, that's great, but you don't really go in expecting to. So if you figure you're going to be 1-1 out of those 2, then you've got the other 2. You've got Marquette, Louisville, Butler, 2 at home, 1 on a neutral court when you probably have more IU fans in the building than anybody else. So then you kind of take that and say, all right, well, you should, can you take 2 of those 3 games in favorable crowd situations? You'd like to think yes, and that puts you kind of at that 3-2 mark. So I end up roughly the same place as you on those. So then I kind of grouped the first 3 Big Ten games together, kind of the ones before that big stretch we talked about. So you got Northwestern at home, at Penn State, Illinois at home. That feels like an opportunity for me to go 3-0 in the league. Again, you can't take road games for granted. Penn State, though, not a terribly tough place to play. You're still going to be in, while Penn State would be on a break between the end of the regular season and their bowl game. I'm not sure anybody's getting too fired up about that. You got Tony Carr left, so you don't know how good Penn State's really going to be. That feels like again, if you want IU to succeed at a high level, it feels like another stretch where you'd like to think they go 3-0. Are you in the same boat on those?
3-0. Caution, the winning on the road is always tough. Winning on the road in the Big Ten, there's outstanding coaches. I'm not really sold on Chambers as a coach, but yet they do win some games on the road. So that's the key one. And we'll talk a little bit, I think, later about what's your goal in the Big Ten on the road, and if it could be 5-5, I think that puts you in really good position if you guard your home court. And that Penn State game is, boy, one of those 5 that we really should get. That puts us at 12-2. We agree on everything at minimum. That puts us at 12-2 going into that tough stretch with a segment of practice time in between.
Yep. So we've got that 8-game stretch. And so, just to go over the games one more time: at Michigan, at Maryland, Nebraska at home, at Purdue, at Northwestern, Michigan at home, at Rutgers, at Michigan State. So if what we have said hopefully happens is correct, I use 3-0 in the Big Ten. They've got this tough 8-game stretch. How do you look at that stretch just in terms of what's a minimum to look at coming out of that, you think, for the Hoosiers during that stretch? At a time we're projecting, we're now 4+ months ahead of the future. So, the further out we get, the harder this is to do. But I'm going to put you on the spot anyway and kind of give us a thought on where they end up during those 8 games.
I say minimum. I would really think Indiana needs to get 3 wins out of this stretch to get a decent seed in the NCAA. That's, I think that's doable. I could see 4 or 5 if we really rise to the top. With Romeo and Jawan back and the good recruiting class, teams rise to the top, and teams that are supposed to be at the top get down to the middle, or, so we could be that team this year. But that's just a tough stretch, and you want to play well and you want to win as many as possible. But I think we can get at Northwestern, at Rutgers. That's 2. I think we can get Nebraska at home. And then I think we really pick off. I think we can beat Michigan at home. I think playing in Assembly Hall is going to be back to being tough. We were 12-6 last year. That's got to change. I can see losing 1 or 2. We play some tough teams, but tough teams have come into Assembly Hall to get crushed. Michigan, number 1, a few years ago, 2014-13, when we had game day. We need to get back to the Assembly Hall being tough, so we're not afraid of Michigan, Michigan State, Purdue, Wisconsin in our home floor. So, I think 3-5, we could take it. I would like to see 4 or 5 during this stretch. That would really set us up well.
Yeah, I'm like you. I think 3-5 at a minimum. I think ideally you'd win them all, but in a more realistic ideal world, 4-4 would feel pretty good. You'd be 7-4 in the league at that point with a lot of your tougher road trips out of the way. And I kind of look at the games like you did. The 2 home games, you feel like, in those stretches, hopefully you can get the at Northwestern, at Rutgers seem to be the most winnable of the road games. And if you manage to do all of those, that puts you at 4-4 at a minimum, and maybe you steal another one. But yeah, I'm in that 3-5 to 4-4 range there. So the next stretch, I deemed the Iowa to Iowa stretch, just because I didn't want to have a 9-game stretch together. And this was as easy a way to group it as any. So, but it's a stretch that starts with a home game against Iowa and ends with a road trip to Iowa. So you've got Iowa, Ohio State, at Minnesota, Purdue at home, and at Iowa. So that 5-game stretch, you've kind of, maybe you feel like you can exhale a little bit. Your gauntlet of those 8 games is done, and now you've got 3 of those 5 at home. Iowa, Ohio State, at Minnesota, Purdue at home, and at Iowa. What are your thoughts on that stretch?
Boy, this is a stretch where we, Indiana, I say we all the time. I know I'm probably supposed to say Indiana as a somewhat quasi-journalist, but Indiana Indiana needs to go at least 3-2 in this segment. A sweep here would be really solid. Again, take care of home court. I think I think we're going naturally on paper without seeing Indiana play. They're better than Iowa and Ohio State and Minnesota, but playing at the barn is always tough. I think we're better than Purdue, and playing at Iowa is tough. So again, 3-2, take care of a home court, lose on the road to teams that you're competitive with. Yeah, 3 or 4 wins I think is a must. We sweep this, and I think we're having a lot of great post-game shows, and the chat mob's going crazy.
Absolutely. I think, the road games in this stretch are hard because I think Minnesota and Iowa are 2 of the tougher teams for me to peg in the Big Ten. Minnesota had injuries, they had suspensions, they had a lot of things last year where they took a huge step back. They have a little bit of personnel turnover, but still a solid core of guys back. So I think they could be much better than what they showed last year. And Iowa, if they decide they actually want to guard somebody, they certainly have some talented offensive players. So those, again, as we do this, looking out, 5 months into the future at this stage, become a little bit hard. But I'm kind of with you. 3-2, 4-1. You hope to do that. If you do better, then great. And then you go into the last 4 games of the season. 3 of those 4 games at home. You've got Wisconsin at home, and the only matchup with the Badgers, you've got Michigan State at home. You have a road trip to Illinois, and you have Rutgers at home. So if we follow through your notion of how much they can protect the home court and they can find a way to win those 3, 2 of those would be quality wins. If Michigan State and Wisconsin are what we think they're going to be. And at Illinois, they're another kind of mystery with the way that Underwood, plays. They've had some roster turnover as well. Feels like a stretch. If they're really playing well and can protect home court, they could sweep it down the stretch as well. But a couple of those home games are ones that you really can't take for granted. Your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, if you go to the Iowa stretch and you take 3 wins and then you take 3 wins in the Final Four, you're sitting at 21, and I know we're in the tournament. Now, that might be a 6, 7, 8 seed. We might have to get a few more wins. But if you go 4-1 and 3-1, now we're sitting at 22 with a win or 2 in the Big Ten tournament. So the thing is, Andy, for me, and again, this is more of a fan than a coaching perspective, I went back through last year's roster. We were 5-11 against teams that we were competitive or underdogs against. That needs to flip. Indiana basketball should not be 5-11 against teams that are competitive. And that's just my criteria. So that's not expert criteria, but we got to beat some of the teams, and Michigan State's scary, but they're coming into Assembly Hall. If we can get that attitude and get the guys playing together and everyone filling their roles, then Indiana is going to have a chance to not just do the minimum as we're talking about. But yeah, the Final Four is tough with Wisconsin, MSU. I say 2 minimum, 3 is probably likely. And we're sitting at probably 21, 22 regular season wins.
Yep. All right. I like it. That sounds good. I'm sure we'll do more of this with Jared and Ryan as the season gets closer, but I thought that was a good way to look at it. You're listening to Assembly Call Radio. I'm Andy Bottoms here with Coach Brian Tonsoni. And we want to talk a little bit about the new metric that's going to replace the RPI, but we're running a little long on this segment. So I'm going to try to hit a couple quick questions that we've gotten that we've been kind of holding in reserve here. And then after we come back from the break, we'll talk about net. So Brian, I'm going to a couple of these over-under questions. So the question here, over-under on the overall team 3-point percentage. This was set, these both came from Joel. This was set at 36%. So last year was 32.2. National average was 35.1. In the 3 years prior, IU was at 38%, 41.6%, and 40.6%. So over-under 3-point shooting as a team this year at 36%. What side are you taking?
I'm going to go over slightly. And that's probably more wishful thinking. If we go over, then we're stretching the floor, and our post players and Juwan have some free reign. And that was our weakness last year with shooting. I'd like to see it. I like to see it as a fan go over until we see Fitzner, Romeo, and Devontae and what kind of shots they get within the offense. And if they're hitting, I don't know if they're capable of making that big of a gain. But boy, it would be nice to have a over.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I'd probably take slightly over, but I do think that number is a pretty good one to set it at, that if you get back to around the average with some of those guys, I don't think we're going to see the number jump up to what it was in the Crean era, just because there was such an emphasis on that and some of the shooters they had during that time. Other over under, this is also related to 3-point shots. Over on total 3-point shots taken. This was set at 700. What I'll say is, so last year it was 602. The year prior it was 776, and the year before that it was 831. I'll take this one first. I'm going to still say take the under on that. Again, I just don't think they're going to get as many. If you set it at 650, I'd probably take the over, because I think on a team that should shoot it a little bit better, you'll probably see them take a little bit more. But 700 for me was just too high. I think with the pace of play and also just the way that Archie wants to play, 700 feels like a huge jump, and would have to suggest that the spacing and the guys taking and making the shots are doing so at a far greater clip. You in the same boat on that one?
I'd have to say slightly under. I have to say whoever's setting these limits ought to work for Vegas Book, because they're setting a really difficult number. You could, if it's going to go over, it's because we are shooting better, and the inside game is opening up some shots, and you're looking at about 3 more threes taken a game, 30 games at 3. If we have the talent, that might be enough to go from 600 something up to 700. I think it's going to be very, very close to 700, but I would also take the under.
All right. Well, coming up in our final segment, Brian and I are going to talk through our initial thoughts on the new NCAA evaluation tool, net metric that's replacing the RPI, and we'll try to answer some more of your questions. So stick with us here on Assembly Call Radio. All right. 16:23. So we've got about roughly 11 minutes to hit in the last one. So I just figured instead of going along with the RPI conversation, we can do that, and then we'll hit some other questions as we go. But I thought those were at least a couple we could hit pretty quickly.
Those are good questions. I tell you what.
Those were good. We've had those for a while, and Jared keeps them in here in case we need more. And I was trying to do some ones that we hadn't hit for a while, but I thought the percentage one was much harder for me, because there's the part of you that's like, they almost, well, one, it's hard to believe that it would be worse, and two, and two, you just want to, as a fan, I think, believe that you'll at least get back to around the national average with the guys that they have in place. So some of that hopefully is not aspirational or dreaming. But yeah, that was a tough one for sure.
The other thing is, and again, I'm overly positive, so the chat room can get on me a little bit on this one, but we got a guy Schilling who knows how to develop people. And if the 3-point shooting was the weakness, I'm sure they talked as a coaching staff of bringing in the personnel to change that and slightly changing what they want to do. But man, that, they don't put it past that we're just better shooters as even the players who are coming back. So that'll be an interesting thing to see.
Yep. I would agree. All right. Well, we'll hit the RPI stuff. I'll just kind of throw it up kind of open-ended to you, just any kind of major takeaways, and then we can talk about whatever we want for, like I said, we got 11 minutes, so if we talk half of it about this a little bit, then I think that's fine.
I had a question. I couldn't fit it in for you. Is it easy or difficult to win 2 years in a row on the road? We won at Iowa and at the Barn, places that we haven't had success. And so we won in a year where we were 16 and 15. Now Indiana's going to be better. And those teams they'll be better too, but we're probably ahead of them on paper. Is it tougher to repeat, or is that something, again, if we're Indiana, we're not afraid of that?
Yeah. I mean, both those games were so different. I think Minnesota was really, you look back on that after the way they finished the season. I don't know that it felt like it was kind of like beating Michigan State in football a couple of years ago. Like, it felt amazing at the time. You're like, man, this is really something that's going to happen. And then you kind of watch the rest of the season play out, and you're like, yeah, maybe not as impressive as you thought. Now, so that was kind of the beginning of the end in some ways for Minnesota, but it certainly can't hurt. And then the Iowa game, I think those are in some ways that's how you're going to beat Iowa. They're just not very good defensively. You get a guy who just really gets locked in, makes a ton of threes. I didn't think IU played particularly well defensively in that game. So if you think that you're going to get better on defense, and Iowa, if you don't believe in them making progress on that end of the court, then that one seems winnable too. But kind of the way they won those games was so different in some ways. It's hard to say, but yeah, I kind of fall in the camp of it certainly can't hurt for the guys that are going back to have that confidence, as opposed to, looking around and trying to find somebody who's ever won a game in the Kohl Center with the program is a little bit tough to do at this point. So at least knowing that you can, I think there was confidence that came out of that. And so I in that way, I don't think it can hurt.
And the other thing that maybe you can remember to tell Jared for other shows is to discuss what it's like to play on the road. I think Indiana's a lot more talented, but you got 8 guys who've never played in the Big Ten and put on that jersey, and you're going to go play in some of these venues that are really tough. And sometimes talented teams go into places and get beat by less talented teams just because of the environment. That's where I get at protect your home court and split on the road. You look at a Rutgers in Illinois, even Minnesota, teams you think you should beat on the road, and then you fly out the day before, you have practice, you sit in a hotel room until 5 o'clock, get to the gym. That's both my boys being managers, I'd understand what it was like on the road. There's a lot of downtime. You're sitting in a hotel room, you're walking through sometimes in the ballroom, and so it'd be interesting to see. And the other topic, Andy, that I'd like to know about is these kids play AAU all the time. They play on the road. I know it's not 16,000 screaming teams, but they go to Vegas and stay in hotel rooms, and they get recruited as 5-star athletes by their play on the road and in hotel rooms. Why is it so difficult on the road? But
yeah,
we have that issue in high school too. It's just a routine. It's a lot more comfortable.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the positive things about playing the Duke game, early in the season, where it's kind of it doesn't hurt you at all if you lose. You get the opportunity to go play in one of the tougher environments that there is out there against a really talented team. And maybe it's one that you fall back on. And I think that Arkansas game, I feel like we harken back to this a lot, but if you think back to, the year that they really turned the corner, that NC State game on the road, we brought that out. I can't tell you how many times we brought that up on the show, where it was I don't think NC State was anything. They were good, but not great. They were an okay team, and maybe Arkansas is kind of the same way, but it was a chance to go on the road in a game that was kind of winnable, that really was a good turning point and a confidence builder for the team. So maybe the Arkansas game this year can be that. And,
True.
maybe you look back and say, hey, that was a good chance to do that. I don't know. But that game's getting pretty old at this point to keep referring back to, but I'm going to do it anyway. All right. Well, we'll hop in here and do our last segment and wrap it up. Gotta get the timer out so I know that we're not going way over. All right. You're listening to the Assembly Call. We're wrapping up another week of talking IU basketball. I'm Andy Bottoms here with the coach, Brian Tonsoni. And Brian, as fellow bracketologists, the news of the RPI probably meant a little bit more to us, although it was kind of a big story in college basketball, to the extent that there are big stories in college basketball in August. So the RPI, the tool and the metric that the NCAA has used to rank and categorize wins as part of the selection process is no more. There had been a process, I think it started, I'm going to say maybe 18 months ago, where they had pulled together a lot of the authors of these different analytical tools. So Jeff Sagarin, Ken Pomeroy, Kevin Palga, who does KPI. They'd had them together and kind of had a summit, if you will, to really talk about what they could do from a metric standpoint to replace the RPI. And so that has, over the course of these last 18 months, led to a few different, some additional discussions, and eventually what was rolled out this week with the net metric, so the NET, that'll now be used in the same way to categorize wins. So what were your initial thoughts on that? I'm sure as you look back, having gotten into bracketology these last few years, your reaction to that, I'm sure, was much different than it was before. But overall thoughts on, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? What do kind of fans need to know based on what you've read and listened to at this point?
My initial reaction was one of fear that it was going to be a standings board. And then the committee was just going to go in and take the top 32 teams as at large or whatever. That, I think, takes the spirit out of our job as bracketologists. might add to some fan attention to know your team's 2 spots off of making an 11 seed. So, there could be some argument there, but that was my biggest fear, that if they go to a mathematical formula metric, and it still could happen if the committee just takes that number as, stone cold rankings. But when I heard the tier system was still going to be in, the net just simply replaces the RPI as a sorting mechanism. And the reason they like the net is because it takes in many different things other than just who you play and who your opponents play and opponents' records and all of that, the wins and losses. It takes in some offense and defensive metrics. As a coach, those metrics, it's you play to win the game. And your margin of victory, do you foul at the end? If you're down 4 with 32 seconds, are you going to foul, or are you going to save your margin of defeat? And those are things that I've had discussions with coaches all the time, that, some coaches would foul all the way down and take a 6-point game and turn it into a 14-point game because they wanted to teach their guys to battle to the end, do some pressure at the end and so forth, and not give up. So I'm not a big fan of that, but I'm also not a big fan of just scheduling and the RPI. So I think this overall is better, Andy. I think it incorporates a lot of things, and I think you'll see a truer measure. And as you put together your bracket, I'm sure you looked at a variety of metrics. When we had a question, we went outside the RPI and we looked at Ken Pom and we looked at Sagarin and what might make the difference in a tiebreaker situation. So I think it's just something that we'll have to get used to. And if it's the true tier system, I think bracketology is the same thing. You're going to look at the number of wins in tier 1 versus tier 2 and 3, and we'll be able to be somewhat close, at least in this first year.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it if they're still going to kind of organize and categorize win the same way, where, beating a team of a certain rank at home is equivalent to beating a certain team of, a wider range on a neutral core, and then on a little bit wider range than that on the road. I don't know how much it changes anything. The thing that I thought was interesting is, one of the takeaways out of that initial meeting, where some of the folks that were involved had some concerns, I guess, about taking kind of results-based metrics. So the RPI being one of those. So things that all it really cares about is who you beat, and what your wins and losses are, with the metrics that are predictive, like a Ken Pom or something like that, and kind of meshing those together. There was some consternation around what that would really do. And it seems like this new metric does that to a certain extent. There is at least a more of a flavor of some of the efficiency metrics and the metrics. But the wins and losses still matter, as we talked about. And I think, Rob Doster of NBC did a good job. He had a podcast with Kevin Powell where he kind of talked about, if, it's a 1-point game and the ball's in the air when the clock's running out, the result of whether that shot goes in or not has to matter. At the end of an efficiency standpoint, it's one possession, so it doesn't really matter that much. So I'm hopeful that they've struck the balance between those different kinds of metrics. I think one of the things that people have called out that makes them a little uncomfortable, is probably too strong a word, is the fact that, all of this is kind of shrouded in mystery in terms of what the actual calculation is. You had a lot of people who could go and reduce the calculation of the RPI on their own and at least come extremely close within a few decimal points of doing that. I don't know. It sounds like it's still yet to be determined how much of the new formula they're going to have. But that's the one thing that makes me a little bit uneasy, which is not to say that I could go and replicate the formula on my own if I wanted to. But I think it becomes a little bit difficult for people to understand. If you really can't say what all goes into it, it becomes difficult for coaches and some of those kinds of things where it's just this black box. Any thoughts from you on that component of things before we hit a few more questions?
Yeah, I think the transparency issue is one of the things that they've tried to increase their transparency over the last 5 or 6 years, with having journalists in and the mock selection situations and sharing information. And then if they're going to keep this formula secret because they own it, they open themselves up to, okay, yeah, Duke's number is always going to be higher. And this, and so all that transparency that they supposedly wanted to bring out, they're losing it with not making it public. If you're going to change it and this number is good, I think they ought to just share with people what it is. that was interesting to me, the privacy. It was interesting to me that they didn't share some stories about going back and seeing what the seeds were or what any teams have been in. That obviously would help us in trying to make a decision. I think it ultimately comes down to, like last year, a team could have been 48 in RPI and being considered, and maybe the net is now 64 and they're not considered. So some teams will benefit from it, and some teams will be knocked out because of it. And the only thing that I'd like to know is this: if you're 16-15 and lose all 1 and 2 point games and win all in 1 2 point games, the scoring margin thing is high in your benefit. Well, not high because you're not winning games big margins, but the efficiency numbers could be different. And is a 16-15 team worthy of getting in if the metrics are based on too many efficiency numbers and games that are close? One could argue that they're in a lot of games and that would be a good tournament team. So if you didn't like the RPI, you're happy. People are not going to be happy about the net as well. And then you and I will just keep being in the top, portion of it, and regardless. So,
well, I like it. I like the way you're thinking. Yeah, one thing they said they were not going to do is go back and kind of restate what teams would have been in previous years, which I think certainly would have helped us from a bracketology perspective. I think would have just been interesting for people to kind of get a better understanding of how it works and find teams that really benefited or didn't benefit. Not doing that kind of opens yourself up to that, and you're not going to know anything until this season. So again, I might have made a different decision. Not my decision to make. We'll adjust and adapt as we do through the bracketology process and go from there.
One last thing that I hope it does is I hope that it gives some quality mid-majors who don't win their conference tournament but have solid records a little bit of an opportunity to maybe sneak in that 10-11 line. I'm an Indiana guy, true and true. My son's a manager at Indiana State, and I see what they go through, and I don't think they're going to be necessarily in a position to get an at-large. But just say if they did and got knocked out in the tournament and they had some quality wins on their schedule and the net is a little bit higher than what the RPI was, I think that's a benefit. I think sometimes we have too many of the top power schools in, the 8, 9, 10 teams from a conference. So let's hope that the net kind of gives us some small guys, at least 2 or 3 of them, a little bit better a chance to get in.
Yep, I like it. All right, you're listening to Assembly Call Radio. I'm Andy Bottoms here with the coach, Brian Tonsoni. And Brian, we got time for 1, maybe 2 questions here. So I handpicked this one for you because of your affinity for this guy. If Robert Finney, this is from Matt on Facebook, if Robert Finney blossoms into a stud at point and Green makes the jump and comes out strong as his sophomore season gets underway, why all the talk that we need a star point guard for next year's class? I'll kind of leave out the rest of this question for the purpose of time. So what are your thoughts on that?
You always need depth, and I would say the answer would be depth, and then the flexibility of Green maybe playing the off guard after if Romeo leaves, you're going to need an off guard. So you can rotate those 3 in, but you can never have enough depth. As we saw, the point guard play struggled at times, and we tried to bring in Newkirk, and then he struggled. You can never have enough point guards on a basketball team.
Yeah, I agree. I think the spirit of the question I agree with, which is, do you really need a top level guy? You're assuming that you're not going to have a point guard. I do think you need somebody who's going to be able to step in and give you minutes, whether that has to be, the top ranked guy in the class who you think you got to come in and play right away. I think that's perhaps a different question. Last one real quick. Saw a recent photo of Rojo back at IU. Got me thinking, who would make the all-time IU beard team? So give me a guy or 2 that you can think of that actually had a beard. I struggled to think of many at all, to be honest with you.
My goodness, that's a tough question in a short amount of time.
I know everybody was so clean shaven in the night era. You can't really think of one. So we may just need to wrap it up. We'll think about that for this week, and we'll come back and see what we can do.
Yeah, we'll have to.
But that'll do it for this week. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of Assembly Call Radio. Or you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for the Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to go to assemblycall.com/join to join our free email newsletter. Thank you for listening. We'll be back to talk IU hoops again with you next week. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers. All right, I totally forgot about the extra time we needed for the outro, so I should never have put you on the spot. But I did think about that question when I saw it come in. Like, I truly can't think of hardly any players who actually had a beard, at least one that was really worthy of
Did
mention.
Blackman have a little goatee, a little chin at a
A
time?
little bit. I thought Watford's was somewhat memorable.
Okay. Yeah.
Somebody in the chat I see said something about DJ White. I'm trying to remember. Did he? I guess he did. Um, yeah, I don't know. I can't remember. I can't remember too many others. So I don't know. We'll think about it. I thought it was a good question with Rojo, but I struggled to come up with any. So
you know what? Some of those guys that played for Crean coming back and in the facility. I know that probably happens at a lot of schools, even with the coaching change. But that's pretty cool to see, guys, that it was about Indiana with no hard feelings, that the coach they came to play for is no longer there. Obviously, Cook Hall and the facilities and Cliff Marshall, I think just with spending a week with Cliff Marshall and learning how to take care of your body has been pretty good. So that as an alumnus, that's always exciting to see that the family type atmosphere.
yeah, I thought the same thing. It's been a parade of guys in there, which I think is good from kind of different eras. And I mean, Bryant in particular, I think is cool because of, he clearly had quite a bond with Green. And so for him to, still come back and be able to benefit from the program is a good thing to have those guys around. So, all right.
I'm doing a game day live tomorrow. We got our ag department got a wagon out by the field. We're going to be sitting on some bar stools with the speaker and
nice
an hour pregame for our big bacon bowl here at Delphi versus Carroll. we play for a frying pan.
All right.
Yeah.
That's
so, yeah, I got to finish the script for an hour's worth of pregame at the football stadium.
Is that the Carroll High School that's up by Fort Wayne?
No, that's different. This is in up here in Carroll County.
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to think if it was the other, because I, going to high school up there, I was like, that would seem weird that you would have like a rivalry game with them for well, I mean, kind of weird with anybody for a frying pan, to be fair.
Yeah.
But particularly with a school that far away, that seemed.
We are in a county that produces lots of bacon and pork. We are known. In fact, they'll be serving pork burgers at the concession stand. And then Saturday, we have the Bacon Fest in town. We shut down 2 streets, bring in live entertainment. We have bacon beer. Every restaurant in town makes something: bacon brownies, bacon cheeseburgers. It's crazy. We have a big hog plant down the road. So a frying pan is somewhat fitting, but it took me some time to get used to it after leaving Bloomington and going up to the Fort Wayne area and at Wabash. So
yeah,
awesome. It never ends.
All right. Well, enjoy. Is that their first game, or is it?
Actually, Delphi won 61-0 in their first game.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we're hoping that we can keep up that offensive production.
That sounds good. Well, best of luck to the team.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well,
thanks a lot. Appreciate it. And
hey, thanks everybody for joining us. And it'll be me in the host chair again next week. I think Ryan will be back and Galen will be here because I know you've got something else going on. So we'll do that. Jared's got something else going on, so he'll get 2 weeks off, and it'll make me appreciate him that much more when he gets back.
Great job, Andy.
All right, Brian. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
Yep.
Enjoy your weekend.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.